Hey, so ProffPhil here. I'm here to talk to you about yet another video by SugaNutt. This one is called The Most Logical and Important Question for an Atheist. Yay, finally something logical and important coming from the creation side. Hopefully. Probably not. Let's look at it. Essentially what you are offering up is Pascal's wager. It's really disconcerting to think that people are still relying on Pascal's wager to try and prove God's existence. Well, not to prove God's existence, but to prove why you should believe in God, whether or not he exists. Let's take a look at Pascal's wager. Essentially, Blaise Pascal, a French mathematician from a long time ago, can't really remember the dates right now, but I'm sure I'll put them up on screen. Basically what he said was that, hang on guys, if you don't believe in God, that's a really bad bet. And here's why. And this is a very simple version. Obviously, a lot of people are going to be saying, hey, that's not Pascal's wager, but just bear with me. This is a very simple version. So essentially what he says is that no matter how good your life is, as an atheist, as a non-believer, no matter how many things you gain that you don't gain from being a Christian or a believer in God, regardless, you could gain thousands and thousands and thousands of, supposed happiness points. It pales in comparison to the amount that you lose if God exists. So here's the deal. If God exists and you believe, you get an infinity of happiness, like an infinite amount of time of happiness in heaven, which is great, right? If heaven actually exists. And if God doesn't exist but you believe, so you lose out on the things that you wouldn't have, or that you would have had going for you in your life if you didn't believe. Okay, that sucks. But here's the other side of it. If you don't believe and God doesn't exist, sure, you gain all of this stuff, all that stuff that you wouldn't have had if you were a believer. So like the ability to drink, the ability to, I don't know, kill people if that's what you want. Not saying that, atheism drives people to that. That's another story, which I'm sure a lot of you hold the opinion of, but you gain all of those things, but you lose so much if God exists and you don't believe. If God exists and you don't believe, you spend an eternity in hell, which is infinitely bad according to Pascal. So he does his probability mathematics, and it turns out, lo and behold, if you were to put a bet on whether or not God exists or God doesn't exist, it's so much better to bet on the fact that God exists. That seems convincing, no? Well, aside from the obvious problem that, sure, you don't actually believe that God exists, so how are you supposed to make yourself believe? Even let's say you get rid of that and you find yourself believing that God exists and that you can actually trick yourself into thinking, you know what, all those other logical reasons, screw them, God exists. You still run into the problem of this is still a metaphysical issue. And if you say that one God exists, what about all of the rest of the possible gods out there? So what about the God that rewards you for not believing? What about the God that rewards you for wearing pink and purple polka dotted ties on Wednesdays? And in both of those cases, if you do believe, or if you don't wear a pink and purple polka dotted tie on Wednesdays, you go to hell. So now are you going to believe in a God, wear purple and pink polka dotted ties on Wednesdays, and also not believe in a God? That's where you run into the problem. If you believe in a God, because if you don't, you run the risk of going to hell. You can't also not believe in a God, because if you do believe in God, you run the risk of going to hell. So how do you choose to make sure which God you're believing in is the right God? Well, you can't. They're all just as likely as the next. It may be the case that in 100 years from now, we find an ancient text, even older than the Bible, that says, hey guys, the real God is me, and I say, please don't believe in me. Otherwise, you're going to hell. So what do? That's why your argument is invalid. So if you have any questions, if you have any things that you have an issue with, let me know, comment back. I'll see if I can try and respond to them. I guess the second part of this is that you claim that atheists don't believe in things that they cannot touch. That's not true. You're confusing atheists with positivists. Now, the positivists were a group of people, specifically the logical positivists were a group of people, started in the Vienna Circle and lasted all throughout, I think, the 19th century, 20th century. And they had loads and loads and loads of influence on the development of modern science. They don't really exist too much anymore as far as I'm aware of. But essentially what their deal was is that they only believe in things that are tangible. So if you're talking about things that don't exist in physicality, like if things that you can't actually touch, they don't believe in those. But the difference is there are plenty of atheists out there that do believe in things that you can't physically touch, but are still tangible. For example, quantum physicists. Their whole line of work involves things that they can't actually physically touch. However, they're still atheists, and obviously they still believe in their work, otherwise they wouldn't be doing it. So yeah. Though you are right about one thing, atheists do not believe in the supernatural, and rightly so, as there's no evidence for it. It doesn't come down to the ostensiveness. It comes down to whether or not there is evidence. There is evidence for quantum physics, but there's no evidence in God. So you can't ostensibly define quantum physics, just like you can't ostensibly define God. However, there is evidence for God, or for quantum physics. Ooh, almost said God there. There is evidence for quantum physics. There's no evidence for God. It has nothing to do with sins or personal desires. It has entirely to do with the fact that there's absolutely no evidence for God. So there you go.